Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a Franciscan priest. I used to teach Irish in National University of Ireland, Galway, for 34 years. And one of my last years there, I got an Irish government scholarship. Spent a year in Rome, looking when Hugh O'Neill, the great Hugh O'Neill, was in Rome, lived in Rome from 1608 to 1616. So I walked the streets of Rome with a book in Irish that was written by a secretary and Roman guidebooks, and I saw all the things they saw, and I got a lot of insights out of it. And then when I retired from teaching, I ended up being stationed in Rome for 6 years, so I even had a chance to do more work. So this is where all this is coming from. We can start from. I'd say there's no need to tell you much about the Red Hand, but I will be telling you a bit more as we go along. That is the map of Ireland, and the green bit, Tyrone, that is basically the territory that belonged to the O'Neills. But in the 16th century, he also had a lot of Donegal, a lot of Derry, a lot of Antrim. They were the most important, really, they were the most important family in Ireland at that stage. And you go on again, yeah. And that's the kit of the Tyrone Gaelic football team, who dominated Gaelic football in the 2000s, winning 3 All-Ireland titles, but a lot of tragedies. Their captain died in his sleep in January 2004 with this sudden death syndrome that young men get. They're only working into it now medically. And then the manager's daughter was murdered on a honeymoon in Mauritius in 2011. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But that's their kit, and the red hand is in the shirt, and the red hand is on the shorts. I'm also honorary president of the ancient Clan O'Neill of Tyrone, and that's their crest. And as you can see, it's a left hand rather than a right hand, because according to the story that the first O'Neills that came to Ireland, there was a rivalry between them, and they were coming to shore. Who gets there first will be King of Ireland. So one of them cut off his left hand and flung it onto shore, and that was the first O'Neill. So that's basically where that comes from. I told them that I was coming here tonight. They have a number of North American bases, and I said, are we entitled to join up? And I was told the more the merrier. So if you want to look up their website, the ancient Clan O'Neill of Tyrone, they'd be delighted to have you. So that's I've done my business bit. I go on to the next one. And of course, it's also used for Northern Ireland, for Ulster, and a lot of loyalist paramilitaries have also used the Red Hand in their band groups called the Red Hand Commando and things like that. So it's a motto that's used by different sides in Northern Ireland. Tyrone comes from the Irish Tír Owen, the land of Owen, and Owen was the ancestor of the O'Neills. In the 16th century, Ireland was not a united country. It was divided up into 150 lordships, and the English only controlled a small area around Dublin. Outside that area, English rule did not run at all. Henry VIII was the first English monarch to really try and control the country, and Henry VIII, he breaks with Rome in 1534, sets up the Reformation in England. He declares himself head of the Church in England instead of the Pope. That was the first Brexit, really, was with Henry VIII. And England has been suspicious of Europe ever since. I mean, what's happening now isn't that surprising. In 1536, the Irish Parliament passes the Act of Supremacy, that the King of England was head of the Church in Ireland too. And in 1541, Henry declared himself King of Ireland. Ireland was no longer a lordship. He's a pretty gross-looking guy, he's 28, and he was, less said about him, the better. We move on. To complicate things in Ireland, in the Gaelic Ireland, the system of succession was rather complicated. Instead of primogeniture, where the eldest son succeeded his dad as prince, it was open to, the leadership was open to a number of candidates in the bloodline. And this led to really regular, vicious warfare and was very disruptive of Irish society. And Henry VIII introduced a new system called surrender and regrant, which meant that a Gaelic prince surrendered his land to Henry, gave up his Gaelic title, and instead received from the Crown of England an earldom, an English title. But from then on, that meant that the prince held his land not in trust for his people, but directly from the crown. So that was the introduction of primogeniture into Ireland. But from the crown's point of view, if the prince was disloyal, the crown could sack him and break him. So it was a way of getting more and more control over Ireland. It was Henry VIII, it was an attempt at controlling, subduing and civilising the Irish from an English point of view. A number of princes accepted the system, including the Reformation, but they accepted it and carried on as if nothing had happened. They just, they said, that's what makes you happy, we'll go ahead with it, but they were not really buying into it. Con Bacach O'Neill became first Earl of Tyrone in 1542. Bacach is an Irish word that means slave. And his son Matthew, though he was illegitimate, he became Baron Dungannon with the right of succession. And the great Hugh O'Neill was born around 1550. He was the second son of Matthew. And at this stage, a devastating war broke out in Tyrone between those people who backed Con's view and those that were against him. The Lord Deputy, Sir Henry Sidney, he too fostered in Dublin with the Huffington family in order to make him a good, loyal English subject. And in 1567 he brought Hugh and other young Irish nobles to London to show how well he was succeeding in subduing the natives. And of course, when he thought he was calming Hugh O'Neill down, from Hugh O'Neill's point of view, he was learning how the English worked, and he was able to use that to his advantage later on. Turlough Linnoch O'Neill, after Con, he was now the O'Neill. The Irish title, I mean, there's Joe O'Neill, there's Tom O'Neill, but the leader was only the O'Neill with no first name. So Turlough Linnoch was the O'Neill. He didn't become Earl. And Dublin was using Hugh to control Turlough's power and eventually break up the O'Neill lordship. Hugh was really de facto Baron Dungannon, but he never had the title. And Hugh was playing a double game for a lot of the time. He fought alongside the Earl of Essex against Turlough Linnoch and was generously rewarded for his services to the Crown for 2,800 sterling in the 1570s. That was quite an amount of money. But Hugh then made a very strategic marriage alliance when he married Siobhan, daughter of Sir Hugh O'Donnell, because up to then the O'Donnells and the O'Neills were sworn enemies in Ulster. They were always fighting each other, and this was O'Neill making an alliance so that he could use the O'Donnells to back him later on. He was recognised officially as Earl of Tyrone in 1585, but he took the banned Gaelic title in 1593. In 1587, he had Red Hugh O'Donnell, the 15-year-old Red Hugh O'Donnell, betrothed to the daughter of Hugh O'Neill, so he's really strengthening the alliance. And Red Hugh O'Donnell was captured by the deputy, who lured him aboard the ship in Donegal to test out new wines that had come from Spain, and then he had him kidnapped and taken to Dublin Castle. Hugh O'Neill was furious. He protested against it. Red Hugh escaped in 1591, but he was recaptured within a couple of days. But another successful attempt was made in 1592, and aided and abetted by Hugh. Hugh O'Neill apparently bribed the jailers to get Red Hugh O'Donnell out, and also supplied a silken robe so he could slip down the wall. When he returned home, Red Hugh's father abdicated, and Red Hugh O'Donnell becomes leader of the O'Donnell clan. So the O'Neills and O'Donnells very much in alliance after that. Hugh O'Neill, he's friends in Dublin, he's friends in London, he's friends among the Old English class, he's friends among the Gaelic Irish class, and he's working them all to increase his own power. At one stage he asked London for lead to roof his castle in Dungannon, and London was quite happy to give him the lead and use it for bullets. I mean, that was the kind of game he was playing all the time. And then at the time of the Spanish Armada in 1588, he showed his loyalty to the crown by massacring survivors of La Trinidad Valenciana, a ship that was shipwrecked off the coast, west coast of Ireland, forces led by his foster brother Henry Huffington. And at the same time, he spared the lives of other survivors and used some of them to train the soldiers in the Spanish technique of warfare. Sir Henry Bagnall, who was Marshal of the Crown Forces in Ireland, he wanted to proceed against O'Neill, but Dublin said no. We don't want to cause. We don't want warfare to. So take it easy. O'Neill then had the effrontery to ask for the hand of Bagnall's sister, Mabel, in marriage, and Bagnall was furious. But when he refused permission, the pair eloped and got married anyway. They were married by the Protestant Bishop of Meath. At that stage, Hugh O'Neill, he wasn't really very worried about religion one way or the other. But in 1592, 1593, he makes the first contacts with Spain seeking military aid. Dublin were getting more and more suspicious of O'Neill's loyalty, and to ease their fears, O'Neill makes a show of helping Bagnall against Maguire in Fermanagh Prince. And O'Neill said he was glad to have been wounded in fighting with Bagnall against Maguire to put off any suspicion of the Crown of his disloyalty. In 1594, other Ulster lords rebel, and O'Neill uses his brothers, his cousins, and other allies to help them, but he himself stays out of it and says to the Crown, I wish I could do more to help you against these rebels. The English forces the first big defeat was at the Battle of the Ford of the Biscuits. That's called the Ford of the Biscuits because the English fled and left all their food behind them, so it's called the Ford of the Biscuits. And O'Neill wasn't involved, he only turned up when the battle was over to claim a share of the booty. Queen Elizabeth was furious that he wasn't arrested, and he's proclaimed traitor in 1595. He's officially proclaimed traitor. And this is the beginning of the 9 Years' War. And mathematically, the 9 Years' War can last for anything from 15 years up to 9 years. Don't try to work it out mathematically. There was another victory over English forces at the Battle of Contiprit in Monaghan. And at this stage, O'Neill was really training his forces in the most up-to-date methods of Spanish war. They were actually better trained than the English forces. And every time he won a battle, he'd seek a truce, and there would be a truce, and he'd use the truce to rearm and train his men better. So he gets a pardon at the end of 1595. For the first time, Spanish agents arrived in Ulster in 1596, and O'Neill and O'Donnell, they ask for military aid, and they request a Habsburg prince as King of Ireland. They suggested Archduke Albert of the Spanish Netherlands. And then O'Neill demands, the first time he shows an interest in religion, he demands liberty of conscience for Irish Catholics, which was totally unallowed under the Elizabethan regime. In August 1598, a major victory over the Crown forces at the Battle of the Yellow Ford. Bagnall himself is killed, and the English army of 4,000, actually 2,000 of them were killed. This was the biggest defeat ever suffered by English forces in Ireland. And it had reverberations in continental Europe as well, and it sparked a nationwide revolt across Ireland. Henry IV of France said that O'Neill was one of the three great military leaders in Europe at the time. He's putting himself first, of course. The Count of Fuentes, who was a Spaniard who was governor of Madrid, is number 2, and Hugh O'Neill is number 3. And even the Pope was getting interested in backing him at this stage. Elizabeth now sends her favourite, Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex, against O'Neill with 16,000 troops, which was a huge army at that time in continental Europe, and it was a very huge army in Ireland. But Essex did funny things. His enemy said Essex used to win support by making people knights, and his enemy said that the only time he drew a sword was to create a knight, to dump somebody a knight, that he never drew it in battle at all. And eventually he went south and met O'Neill. He was on one side of a river bank. O'Neill waded into the river on horseback. They talked for a long time. Nobody really knows what they said. O'Neill again demanded liberty of conscience for Irish Catholics, and Essex, of course, said, O'Neill, you care as much about, my horse cares more about religion than you do. But Essex went back to England without permission. Elizabeth was furious. That was the beginning of Essex's downfall. He was beheaded a couple of years later. 1600, Pope Clement VIII grants a plenary indulgence to O'Neill's allies, but O'Neill wanted him to excommunicate those who would not support him, and the Pope balked at that. The Old English, the people of Norman extraction in the towns in Leinster and Munster, they were very reluctant to support O'Neill militarily, and they were very much backed by the Jesuits. Franciscans and Jesuits have a kind of an unhappy relationship in this part of Ireland's history, because the Franciscans were more for military intervention, and the Jesuits were more for loyalty to the monarch and hope for freedom of religion. Then a new Lord Deputy was appointed in 1600, Charles Blunt, Lord Mountjoy, and he had a totally different approach to warfare, with scorched earth policy, burn crops, burn houses, and started building forts around O'Neill's territory to try and hem him in. The Spanish aid finally arrived in September 1601, 3,500 men under Don Juan de la Guilla. They took over the town of Kinsale in the southwest of Munster, in Cork, almost as far south as you could go, and as far from O'Neill's power base. It was a disastrous choice, and it was also in a part of the country where the English had already suppressed the revolt. But the Mountjoy's forces besieged the Spaniards in Kinsale, and then O'Neill and O'Donnell marched south, leaving their own territories unguarded, which was a bit of a risk, and they surround Mountjoy's troops. The ideal thing would have been for O'Neill and O'Donnell to sit tight and just starve the English out. And that seemed to be working, but the Spaniards wanted to fight, they wanted battle. And also the Irish army was a bit too large to stay in the field too long. So eventually the Irish decided to attack. You know, there were two calendars in Europe at the time. There was the old calendar, and then there was a new calendar introduced by the Pope Gregory XIII, 1582, which meant that there's a period up to the 18th century between the Catholic countries and the Protestant countries where there's a 10-day difference. So depending which way you're looking at it, the Irish attacked the 3rd of January 1602, but from the English side it was the 24th of December. They were spotted early on. There was a cavalry charge. The English cavalry, their horses were much heavier than the smaller Irish horses. The Irish cavalry was routed, and the whole army broke up, and it was a disastrous result for the Irish. And that was over within an hour. 1,200 were dead, 800 wounded and died later. Red Hugh O'Donnell went to Spain to get further Spanish aid, and he died from natural causes in Spain. When I was a kid, we were told that he was poisoned by an English agent. We all wanted to believe that, but apparently he just died from natural causes. O'Neill held out for 2 years more, but he eventually surrendered to Mountjoy at Mellifont in 1603. And Mountjoy willfully withheld from him the fact that Elizabeth had died a few days earlier, because O'Neill had been half friendly with James VI of Scotland, who now became James I of England, and O'Neill most likely would not have surrendered had he known that James I was king. He actually shed bitter tears, not of sorrow for his rebellion, but of anger that he'd been duped by Mountjoy. But he got very, very generous terms from he had bankrupted the English treasury. England was very war-weary, and they gave him he retained nearly everything that he had within Tyrone. And a lot of the Dublin Castle officials, the people, they were furious, and they did not keep the terms of the treaty. They kept harassing O'Neill for the next couple of years. He was summoned to London in 1607, but warned by a friend that he might be let return, that he'd end up either beheaded or in the Tower of London. And at that stage, he himself and the 100 followers, with Rory O'Donnell, they leave by ship for Spain on the 14th of September. And this is known in history as the Flight of the Earls. The term flight does not occur in Irish sources. It occurs only in English sources. Like travelling abroad today, the Irish would have needed passports to go to the continent. And at that time, the passports could only be given by the English monarch. And of course, there was no way the monarch would have given the passports anyway. So to that extent, it was a flight. But everybody's arguing, was this premeditated? Was it a panic decision? A recent scholar has called it a strategic retreat, because O'Neill wanted to go to Spain to get more military aid. But at that stage, Spain had signed a treaty with London in 1604, 1944. And one of the clauses was that neither side would aid the enemies of the other. So Spain was very embarrassed by the fact that the Irish were making for Spain. They didn't want them next or near Madrid, but at the same time felt guilty. They are our allies, and we're bound to help them. And their problem was how to help O'Neill without offending them. Peace with England was priority for the Spaniards, and in this case, the Irish were just pawns in the game. They were small fry. As things turned out, the Atlantic storm swept the Irish ship off course when they were only within 10 miles of the Spanish coast, but swept them on northwards to France, and they landed in part of France, in Quillebeuf, on the 4th of October 1607. That's where they left from. That's where they were heading. Now the obvious way would have gone down this way, but the English Navy would have been there, so they took the long way around, the stormy way around, to avoid the English Navy. And when they thought when they were about here, the storm swept them up that way, and they ended up in France. And the rest of their trip was really from there, how they go through the continent and the different countries and the different. Spanish Netherlands was very allied to Spain, but there were some places in Switzerland where there were others. It was a difficult journey. England, and then the King of France comes into play here. England sends word to the King of France, arrest these rebels, arrest these traitors. And the King of France is quite annoyed that another king is telling him what to do in his own territory. So the King of France replies, any Catholic is free to move freely through my own territory, and nobody will tell me what to do. But at the same time, he didn't direct the Irish towards Spain where they wanted to go. So he keeps the King of Spain on his side, but he directs them northwards into the Spanish Netherlands, which is still Catholic territory. And the Irish party will leave French territory on the 18th of October, and they remain in Spanish Netherlands until the 28th of February following. Very warm welcome initially, but then it begins to grow cold. Spanish Netherlands, Catholic, they're at war with the Dutch, who are Protestant, and England is supporting the Dutch, and the Spanish Netherlands needs England's help to broker a truce. So O'Neill is the fly, the Irish party, they're the fly in the ointment. And at that stage, the Spanish Netherlands under pressure from London, and then the King of Spain said, send them off to Rome. They fought for the Catholic faith. It's up to the Pope to look after them. And that's the decision that was taken. So the Irish party, they head south on the 28th of February. They lose most of their money when the pack was carrying it falls over a dangerous bridge in Switzerland on the 17th of March. St. Patrick's Day is a bad day to lose your money. They're in Milan from the 23rd of March to the 12th of April, treated very well there. It's under Spanish control. They visit the Marian shrine of Loreto the 21st to the 23rd of April. Before Lourdes, and you know the grotto here, before Lourdes, Loreto was the biggest Marian shrine in Europe. And also during the Reformation, Loreto became a very, very important place, because after the Battle of Lepanto, when the Christian armies defeated the Turks and broke Turkish power in Europe, all the military commanders like Don John of Austria and Marcantonio Colonna, they all went to Loreto in Thanksgiving afterwards. So when Hugh O'Neill goes to Loreto, there may be personal piety, but there was also, he was playing a strategic game. He's presenting himself as a Catholic military commander of the Counter-Reformation, and therefore worthy of help from Spain and the Pope. So he's playing his cards carefully. They arrive in Rome on the 28th of April, and they're initially treated like heroes in Rome. And they are guests of honours at the canonization of Santa Francesca Romana on the 29th of May, which was the biggest event in Rome in 1608. Francesca Romana was made the patron saint of Rome. She's the first Roman saint from the time of the martyrs. So this is a big, not just a religious event in Rome, it's a big civic event in Rome. And the O'Neill secretary gives a very interesting account of that, the canonization ceremonies. On the 12th of June, they made the pilgrimage of the 7 basilicas, and the Pope Paul V gave orders that all the relics should be shown to them. When people couldn't go to the Holy Land because of the Turks controlling the Mediterranean, the pilgrimage, 7 basilicas in Rome, and the joint and the pilgrimage to Loreto taken together as one, that was considered a virtual pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So it was important people did this dual pilgrimage. That's just, you remember the Roman holiday film? I gave that as a title of the talk in Rome a couple of years ago. That's a 1680 representation of human need. This is the pilgrimage of the 7 basilicas. And what you'll notice about that, this was made for the whole year of 1575. There's no Colosseum, there's no Pantheon. All classical Rome is eliminated from the script. And the only thing shown in it are pilgrims and basilicas. And this was meant, they were trying to, after the Council of Trent, and the Catholic Church had fought defeated the Protestant Reformation, and after the Battle of Lepanto, when they defeated the Turks, there was a kind of a triumphant Rome, and they were trying to present Rome as the holy city par excellence. You'll also notice there too that the river divides, it's sacred, Rome is all a sacred space. The river divides the city in two. This is St. Peter's, where he's buried. This is San Pietro Montorio, where he was allegedly executed. We know now that's wrong. And the Tiber, this little island in the middle of the Tiber, is like a boat. And it's like, this boat is ferrying pilgrims from the sacred space to the heavenly space over here. It's all a very, very organized kind of. You can go, you can leave that, go on to the next one. Yeah. And that, at this time too, the popes were making, Pope Sixtus V was the first urban town planner, and he has new roads between the major basilicas to make it easier for pilgrims. That's, yeah, go ahead. And this is the canonization of Santa Francesca Romana. You can go ahead. I said it was the biggest celebration. The civic authorities provided 20,000 scudi for the celebrations, and the church, St. Peter's especially, was really organised with drapes and banners and things like that. This O'Keenon says the people of Rome lit fires and beacons in their palaces and at the doors of their houses, with many candles and bright torches over their dwellings. The top of the castle of Sant'Angelo was covered with varied lights. In early modern Europe, Rome was the place for fireworks. Fireworks started in Rome before any other capital city. And you can imagine people comparing rural island and they're seeing fireworks for the first time in their lives, and they're both shocked and scared and awed. So, yeah. And this is what the Irish text says. The image of an eagle and a dragon, artistically, finely and beautifully placed on the castle of Sant'Angelo and filled with powder on the inside. And then at about 6 o'clock in the evening, fires were lighted in these strange, wonderful birds. And it says at the end, it was enough to cause the greatest terror and admiration in the world for the one who had never seen the light before to be viewing it. Now he talks about the image of an eagle and a dragon, but the coat of arms of Paul V has the dragon and the eagle. So the image of that's what the idea of a dragon and eagle were. And that's a contemporary drawing of the fireworks display from Castle of Sant'Angelo. There's this print was brought out about Santa Francesca Romana. There's the stages in the ceremony of the canonization. There's the miracles of the saint, and then a short story of her life. Leave that one out. Yeah. The Italian text says the holy actions and the miracles of the saint. The Irish text says it was discovered and deduced from her holy life in this world by virtue of the wonders and miracles that God performed through her, that she had a saintly life. Okay, the Irish guy is much more theologically correct than the Romans were. He's talking about the miracles God worked through her. So, move on. Go on again. Yeah, go on, yeah, next. This is an example of canonisation ceremony 2 years later, and the ceremony shows candles, birds, gilded barrel of wine, and gilded bread. And the Irish party were given these presents the day after the canonisation, and we thought it sounded corny, but actually that was, we know from other canonisations that was part of the procedure. That's it in bigger detail. Go on to the next one. We'll leave that one out. That one too. Yeah, this is the canonisation of Santa Francesca Romana. And that's a more detailed one. But if you see around the Pope, they're all clerics and cardinals and that. And if you look at these two guys here, and go on to the next one. These two guys here, I had a suspicion that was Hugh O'Neill. And I was trying to prove it out. And I showed it to somebody in the Spanish embassy. And they said, oh, that's bound to be the Spanish ambassador because he's wearing the chain of the Golden Fleece. And that kind of clinched it because O'Neill was accompanied by the Spanish ambassador. And that's the only, that was my party piece for a number of years because that's the only authentic representation of him that we know that was made during his lifetime. So, yeah, leave that one go. As in the Spanish Netherlands, the initial welcome in Rome was only a smokescreen. Neither the Pope nor the Spanish ambassador had any intention of giving O'Neill money or arms or giving him passport to go to Spain. Madrid was determined to keep O'Neill in Rome. If the treaty with England broke down, he was a great card to have in reserve. If war broke out again, they back O'Neill. But until then, as long as the peace held, O'Neill was to remain in Rome. And the Spanish archives are full of pathetic letters from O'Neill seeking permission to go to Spain. And if not Spain, then go back home. One letter says, I prefer to return to danger of death in Ireland at the head of 100 men rather than remain in Rome. And one of his last letters on the 12th of July 1615 says, we only wish with his permission as our King and Lord to go forward to an honourable death than end our lives in miserable exile. By the entrails of Christ, I beg you to send me an answer that I may decide upon my course of action. And the response in Madrid was no, no, no. O'Neill died in Rome on the 20th of July 1616. The Spanish ambassador paid for the funeral, but he wrote to Madrid saying, in such a way that it might not cause difficulties in the relations of your Majesty with the King of England. Pay for the funeral, but don't make it too flashy or splashy. And the very simple tombstone in the Spanish Franciscan Church of San Pietro Montorio. That's all there. TON, to God the greatest and best. The bones of Prince Hugh O'Neill. Very, very simple, nothing flashy about it. And if you go, and while his son, who died sometime later, has got a big elaborate tomb, and the Red Hand is there in the middle of Rome, he got a much more elaborate tombstone, but when Hugh O'Neill died, it was very, very little. And that is the church in San that's Rory O'Donnell's grave, that's young Hugh O'Neill's grave, and then that's the simple tombstone of the other guy. And I think that's one of the great ifs of Irish history. Had he won, where we would be today, but he didn't win, and that's where we are now. So, thank you, Grandma.